Every morning at 6:45 a.m., just before the shelter opened its doors to volunteers and early adopters, kennel number 12 stood empty, and yet no one could explain how. The latch was always intact. The surveillance camera above showed nothing suspicious. The night staff, mostly high school kids trying to make a little extra cash, swore the dog was there when they left, but by sunrise, he was gone, only to return later. Just before anyone noticed, the dog in question was a quiet, solemn German shepherd named Shadow. 6 years old, lean, with a coat so dark it seemed to soak in light. He didn't bark much, didn't eat much, and he barely acknowledged the people who walked past his kennel. But every night, he vanished. Joanne, a 62-year-old shelter assistant, had been working at Briarwood Animal Shelter for nearly 15 years. She'd seen her fair share of mysteries. Runaways, reunited pets, animals that came back like boomerangs, but never anything like this. And it was starting to gnaw at her. One morning, after finding Shadow's kennel once again empty, and the dog sitting calmly at the back of the lot, just as the sun peeked over the trees, Joanne made up her mind. "I'm staying tonight," she told Marta, the shelter manager, "and I don't care if I have to sleep next to that dog's kennel. I'm going to find out where he goes." Marta raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "I haven't been this serious," Joanne deadpanned, "since I caught Dave sneaking extra kibble for the pit bulls. And that night, after everyone else had clocked out, and the lights dimmed to a sleepy hum, Joanne rolled out a sleeping mat. Between kennels 11 and 12, Shadow was curled at the far end of his run, unmoving, eyes half closed. At 2:13 a.m., his ears perked up. At 2:14 a.m., he stood, paced twice in a circle, then did something that made Joanne gasp out loud. He pushed his snout against the metal latch in a way that was so methodical, so practiced. It was like watching someone unlock their own front door. Click! The gate swung open with a soft squeak. Shadow stepped out and paused. Then, without a glance back, he trotted toward the rear exit. Joanne, heart pounding like a schoolgirl sneaking out past curfew, followed him into the night. She had no idea. Her life was about to change forever. Shadow's paws made almost no sound as he padded through the tall grass behind the shelter. The moonlight caught the silver flecks in his fur, making him look ghostly. Ethereal, more spirit than dog. Joanne stayed a few paces behind, barely breathing. Terrified she'd spook him, she half expected him to dart into the woods or vanish around a bend. But instead, Shadow moved with quiet purpose, as if he were following a map only he could see. Down a narrow path between two overgrown lots, across the back road behind the shuttered gas station, past the old diner that closed during the pandemic and never reopened. It was a 15-minute walk, maybe more. Joanne's knees ached. Her breath came in shallow spurts, but she kept going. Then, just past the rusted playground in Willoughby Park, Shadow stopped. Joanne ducked behind a hedge, watching. The dog approached an old wooden bench and sat. That's when Joanne saw it. A small makeshift memorial, a weather-worn teddy bear, a faded photograph in a plastic sleeve, a pair of tiny rain boots, carefully placed side by side, and a plaque. Joanne crept closer. The inscription read, "In memory of Emily Rose Cartwright, 2017-2022. Our sunshine forever loved." Joanne's breath caught in her throat. Shadow lay down beside the boots and rested his head against them. Then he let out a long, low whine. That sounded like the grief of 1,000 lonely nights. Joanne felt the tears before she realized they were falling. This wasn't just a nightly stroll. This was a pilgrimage, a ritual of love and loss. Shadow had been visiting a grave. The next morning, Joanne sat in the break room with a cup of tea clutched between trembling hands. She hadn't slept a wink. Her sneakers were muddy, her back was screaming, but none of that mattered. She stared at the photo she'd taken, of the bench, of the boots, of Shadow curled beside them, like a guardian angel who'd failed his mission. Marta walked in with a yawn and a donut. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I did," Joanne whispered. She told Marta everything. Within hours, the shelter's small volunteer team was buzzing. The staff photographer pulled up old intake records. A few calls were made. A woman from the city archives got involved. And bit by bit, a heartbreaking tale began to emerge. Shadow wasn't just a stray, he was Emily Cartwright's dog. Emily was 5 when she died in a tragic car accident on Willoughby Road. Her mother, a single parent, survived with critical injuries. Shadow had been in the car too, strapped in the backseat beside Emily. They said he'd escaped through a broken window after the crash and ran off into the woods. He wasn't seen again for nearly 6 months, until he turned up at the shelter, malnourished, limping, and emotionally shut down. No one made the connection. There was no microchip, and Emily's mother had been too devastated to ask about the dog. Joanne stared at Shadow that afternoon as he lay quietly in his kennel. "You never forgot her," she murmured. "All this time, you were going back to her." And Shadow, without moving, blinked slowly, as if to say, "Of course I did." Joanne couldn't get the image out of her head. Shadow curled up beside those little rain boots, like he was still trying to protect a child who wasn't there anymore. The shelter was unusually quiet that afternoon. The usual barking had faded, almost like the other dogs sensed. Something sacred was unfolding. Joanne made a decision. She picked up the shelter phone and dialed the number she'd gotten from city records. Mary Cartwright, Emily's mother. It rang 3 times. "Hello?" A woman's voice, cautious. "Hi, Mrs. Cartwright? My name's Joanne. I work at the Briarwood Animal Shelter." There was a pause. Joanne took a breath. I think we have your dog." Another long silence. Then faintly, "That's impossible. Shadow's gone. He ran away after the accident. We never found him." Joanne's throat tightened. "He came to our shelter months ago. We didn't know who he belonged to, but he's been leaving every night, sneaking out, going to the bench, Emily's bench." A muffled sound, Mary trying to stifle a sob. I need to see him," she said quietly. Joanne's voice cracked. "Come any time. He's waiting." Mary Cartwright walked through the shelter gates just after 2 p.m. the next day. She was in her early 40s, but grief had aged her. Deep lines framed her eyes. Her shoulders drooped, like she carried invisible weights. She clutched a small cloth bag close to her chest. Shadow was asleep when she arrived. He hadn't moved much all morning, barely touched his food, as if something in him knew this day would be different. When Mary stepped into the kennel hallway, he looked up. At first, nothing. Then his ears twitched, his head tilted, and then he stood up. Joanne opened the kennel door, stepping aside. Shadow took one cautious step, then another. His nose lifted slightly into the air, and then, like a dam bursting, he bolted, straight into Mary's arms. She fell to her knees with a gasp, as Shadow crashed into her, whining, licking, pressing his head into her chest, his whole body trembling with recognition. "Oh my God, Shadow, you came back," she whispered, clutching him like she'd never let go again. The shelter workers stood frozen in the hallway, some covering their mouths, others openly weeping. Joanne turned away, wiping her eyes. It was one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking things she'd ever seen. After the reunion, Joanne invited Mary to sit in the quiet staff lounge, with Shadow curled up at her feet, his head resting on her shoes, like an old habit remembered. Mary set the cloth bag on the table and unzipped it. "I brought something," she said softly. She pulled out a small red hoodie, faded, child-sized, with a cartoon bear on the front. "It was Emily's favorite," she said, barely above a whisper. "Shadow used to curl up with it whenever she left for preschool. I thought maybe he'd want it." Joanne nodded, unable to speak. Mary placed the hoodie gently beside Shadow. He sniffed it, then curled his body around it, like a protective shell. His eyes closed, and he slept, a deep, peaceful sleep Joanne hadn't seen in months. Over the next few days, Mary visited every morning. Shadow would perk up the moment he heard her car door shut outside. He never barked, never jumped. He just waited by the gate, calm and certain, like he'd known she'd return all along. But Joanne began to worry. "We can't keep him here forever," she told Marta one evening. "He needs more than a kennel." "I know," Marta sighed. "But Mary's not exactly in the best place financially. She's been living in a one-bedroom apartment since the accident. The dog deposit alone is hundreds. Joanne folded her arms. We'll figure something out. And that night, she posted on the shelter's Facebook page. This is Shadow. He's not just a dog. He's a guardian, a heart still beating for a little girl who left the world too soon. And now he's found his way back to the one person who needs him, just as much as he needs her. Let's help him go home. Within 48 hours, the donations flooded in, from townspeople, from strangers in other states, from former adopters who remembered Shadow's solemn eyes. Enough to cover the apartment fees, the deposit, a year's worth of food, and then some. By the end of the week, Shadow stepped through the door of Mary's small apartment. With hesitant pause, it wasn't the house he remembered. There were no crayon marks on the walls, no pitter-patter of tiny feet, no toy bin overflowing in the corner. Just a quiet one-bedroom with beige carpet and empty photo frames on the shelf. But Mary was there, and for Shadow, that was enough. He walked the perimeter of the living room, sniffing cautiously. Then, as if finally accepting it, he lay down beside the couch and rested his head on the hoodie Mary had brought from the shelter. She sat on the floor next to him, one hand on his back. I couldn't bring myself to adopt another dog, she said softly. After the crash, it felt like loving anything else was betrayal. Shadow didn't move, but he let out a long breath, a sound of understanding. That night, Mary put away the unopened wine bottle. She'd been reaching for every night for 3 years. For the first time in a long time, she didn't need it. She had company again. A few weeks later, Joanne came by for a visit. She carried a gift, a framed drawing made by one of the shelter volunteers. It was of Shadow sitting by the memorial bench, his eyes fixed on the tiny boots. Mary took it gently in her hands, lips trembling. He really went every night, she asked again, almost like she still didn't believe it. Joanne nodded. Like clockwork. Mary placed the picture beside the urn on her mantel, Emily's ashes, then finally reached into the drawer where she'd kept all of Emily's belongings. The little box had been untouched for years. She pulled out a drawing, a stick figure version of Shadow, with the words, "My bestest protector," scrawled in pink crayon. She placed it beside the new drawing. Now he's back, she whispered. He kept his promise. Joanne didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room, heavy with memory, was also beginning to fill with peace. Every Sunday morning, Mary and Shadow walk together to the bench at Willoughby Park. They bring fresh flowers. Shadow still lays by the boots, his body curled in that same silent posture of loyalty. But now Mary sits beside him, hand on his back, sometimes humming a song Emily used to love. Occasionally other families come by. They ask if it's okay to sit with them, to hear the story. Mary always says yes. Soon the bench became more than a memorial. It became a place of healing, of remembering. And thanks to a donation from the shelter's fundraiser, a new sign was added beside the old plaque, in loving memory of Emily, and the dog who never stopped waiting for her. Below it a quote, "Grief is the price we pay for love. But sometimes love waits at the bench." The story went viral after the shelter posted the video. Dog escapes every night to visit his little owner's memorial. What shelter worker found left her in tears. Emails flooded in from across the country, from grandparents who'd lost their grandchildren, from veterans who understood loyalty, from children asking if Shadow could be their pen pal. Mary created a small mailbox near the bench. Now every week, she and Shadow read a few letters together. Some are simple crayon drawings, others are handwritten notes, but from seniors in the UK and Canada, saying they've never cried harder in their lives, and thanking Mary for sharing her journey. One letter came from a man in Wales. "I lost my son at 5. I've never stepped foot in the park where we used to walk. But your story, it's making me think maybe it's time." Shadow is old now. His black coat has softened with gray. His walks are slower. His ears don't twitch like they used to. But every evening, at 9 sharp, he walks to the front door and nudges his leash. Mary always smiles. "Ready?" Together, they head to the park. The boots are still there, the photo replaced. The teddy bear now lives inside. safe from the weather, but the bench remains. Shadow curls beside it. Mary sits in silence. And sometimes, just sometimes, she swears she feels a small breeze brush past her cheek, like the giggle of a child carried by wind. She looks up. Shadow's eyes are closed, but his tail wags once, slow and sure. And in that quiet corner of the world, time stands still, because love, real unconditional love, never truly ends. It just waits, quietly, faithfully, even if it has to wait by a bench.